Night Times is a production of KTCA, Channel 2. Live from the Twin Cities, this is Nighttime Sportsline with Jim Klobuchar.
Good evening. All the billboards said the Minnesota North Stars were going to sip nectar from the Stanley Cup in the spring of 1982. This is the spring of 1982. Somebody must have slipped sawdust into the drink because what the North Stars are tasting is neither sweet nor very nourishing. There are such unusual people as the Chicago Blackhawks still in the playoff sweepstakes, but the North Stars are either fishing, watching television, or playing in Helsinki, Finland, where the weather is worse than it's been here. So what happened? We've asked Glen Sonmor, the very competent and usually sociable coach of the North Stars, to dig around in the anatomy of the playoffs and offer some findings. We've also asked the very competent, but not always a sociable, sports columnist for the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, Joe Soucheray, to join us. This is a democratic place. You can do the same by calling 642-1980. That's 642-1980. Glenn, there has to be some common denominator to explain why 3 of the teams with the 5 best records in professional hockey failed to survive the early rounds of the playoffs. That's the North Stars, Edmonton, and the other team was
Montreal.
Montreal, right. What is it?
I think, Jim, without alibying it all, I think perhaps we all took some things for granted. We also all ran into teams that had something to prove or something to regain, I guess. The teams, for example, Chicago had a very disappointing season for them, and they saw a chance in the playoffs to salvage something, much as we had done a couple of previous seasons. And I think that explains it as well as anything. The teams that finished well ahead perhaps were a little complacent or thought it was automatically going to happen. The teams that were playing were very hungry and very, very anxious to salvage something from a disappointing season.
Something has to be superfluous here. You play, what, 82 games? 16 out of 21 teams qualify automatically for the top 16 teams, qualify out of 21 for the playoffs. Is it the regular season that's superfluous? Does it become a situation where the playoffs are superfluous because they get so much money?
Well, I think, Jim, in hockey, the players, and if you talk to everybody, so much is put on the Stanley Cup and the playoffs. If anything's superfluous, it's the season, I'm afraid. That isn't right, but I'm afraid that's what it is. To the people say this, they can always tell you who won the Stanley Cup, can't tell you who won the season. I think it's much like the Super Bowl. We know who won the Super Bowl. Sometimes you don't remember who won individual divisions or who finished the season with the best regular record.
Joe, how come you guys in the press can't be more persuasive on the hockey establishment and trying to convince them that they really should do something about this playoff system?
I've tried.
I'm listening for your voice on this.
I've
Give me some wisdom.
I've done it 2 or 3 times a year, arguing for some sensible way to not have 16 of the 21 teams in. It's disappointing. It's the most ludicrous playoff system in all of professional sports for one of the most prestigious prizes in all of professional sports. The Stanley Cup, I think, has a far greater history and tradition than the Super Bowl, for example. But football even keeps its playoff entrance down. I wish hockey could keep its down, and I don't know how they're going to. It's one of the ways you're paying salaries, right? You need these games. You don't have television money.
Well, you get 15,000 people for games that are essentially, I think, exhibitions. 82 games of exhibitions.
But I think, Jim, the answer is I can best set it out this way. I think we've played the last 3 years in Washington late in the season, and each time Washington, and they've never made the playoffs yet in 7 years, but each time they had a chance of getting in, and the place was full, and the signs were up, and they were saying, this is the year. And I can imagine if, say, 8 teams were in, Washington would be long out of it. That place would be half empty for maybe the last 10 home games. And I just think simply you're not going to convince the owners to change the format for that simple reason.
There's another explanation. Maybe the North Stars aren't that great. Maybe they had a fine record. I'm not arguing that. Maybe there's something about this team that didn't generate the kind of quality that was needed in the playoffs.
That's a distinct possibility, Jim, and it's something that we obviously have to take a look at. We accomplished a lot during the year that we'd set out to accomplish. We moved up with what we consider the elite teams of the year of the league, which was our goal. We finished in the middle of Boston and Buffaloes and the real good teams. We were a little gap away from the Islanders and Edmonton, which was a surprise to everybody. Other surprise, the Rangers, with our good friend Herbie Brooks doing a miraculous job, moved way up into that group we're in.
Not good, but miraculous.
Yeah, he did a miraculous job. Yeah. He really did. A couple of teams fell away from the upper echelon. Los Angeles and St. Louis. Both are trying to scramble, as I mentioned earlier, save something from their season. So we did what we had some goals for ourselves during the regular season to move up into that group, and I think we did, where we could be a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. This is the first year since I've been here we were a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. We flopped. The other years we were a long shot.
Well, let's get some names here, Joe. Which of the North Stars disappointed you? You saw a lot of hockey this year. Who are overrated on that team?
Tim Young, which might be unfair because of his injuries. Geez, you're really putting me on the spot.
Well, individually, let's look at Brad Palmer. Why wasn't this player more valuable this year? Here's a guy with a great shot. Spent a lot of time
Another great shot is Kristoff. Yeah. Individually, I think the Stars are extremely talented. Individually. You tell them.
Yeah, who's overrated on your team?
I'm not going to tell you who's overrated.
Just tell me.
You do the rating.
Yeah, I've got my own ideas, Jim and Joe, of some people that or some kind of additions we have to make. Obviously, I'm not going to discuss it here, but
that crushes me.
I do think that we found out some things as an organization that we need a couple of more. People refer to them as gamers, or when I talk about this kind of thing, I get accused of wanting goons and things. That isn't what I want at all. I think this team needs 2 or 3 more people who have that, what we call or refer to as, and I was talking with John Cota about this, about in any sport, that burning desire to excel and the ability to rise to the occasion when you really get challenged and tested, and I think
don't tell me that Bobby Smith doesn't.
Bobby did in the playoffs. One of the people who some fans and people criticize of not having that ingredient showed it in abundance, and we had some others again, but and obviously it's not my place to do that here. But we, plain and simply, we were a couple short of that yet.
Give me your candid view, Joe. And this is a fine human being and a great athlete. Bill Nyrop was sold to us, admittedly 3 years out of hockey, sold to us as being somewhere between awesome and immortal. Before he ever joined, I think Sid had a part of that. I think he's an excellent hockey player, and unquestionably, without question, a fine human being. But maybe Bill Nyrop isn't quite that great player that we were expecting him to be.
I don't think that he was what he was billed to be. I think how old is he, 29? He's close to 30 years old, 28 years old, and must have been incredibly difficult for him to come back after a layoff. He too had injuries that kept him on and off the rink all year. I wanted to bounce a theory off Glenn and you.
He hasn't told us about Bill Nyrop.
Tell us about Bill Nyrop.
I will say this about Bill Nyrop. I think it was unfortunate the ballyhoo that accompanied his return, that I think people expected something like Bobby Orr, which those of us who watched Bill perform before knew. Bill is a rare breed in hockey today. He's a defensive defenseman. He's just exactly the kind of thing our team needs and needed. Unfortunately for Bill, everything went wrong for him, starting with he was going to have a chance to ease into the season. He'd been out for 3 years by playing for Team USA in the Canada Cup, and he looked excellent at the beginning of their camp. Then he got pneumonia, missed all that. Then he came with us to get started. He got a bad groin injury, missed a whole lot again. He unfortunately for Bill, never had a real stint during the year where he could show what he could do. When he was available, he played very well. He plays in a manner that people sometimes don't appreciate. He's the best plus and minus defenseman on our team when he played. Bill Nyrop's a fine player who was facing a difficult task coming back from 3 years of inactivity that was made impossible by the string of injuries they had. I hope and think that if Bill Nyrop has an injury-free next season, he'll be an excellent addition to this team.
Sounds fair to me. What were you going to bounce?
Just a very wide theory, and I don't know how we can even narrow it down to hockey, but I sometimes think that this might be the easiest town in the country, in North America, to be a pro athlete in. When fans boo the North Stars, it was almost as though they were afraid to do it because it was an impoliteness. I see the same kind of phenomena at Vikings and Twins games.
Your very good and dear friend Francis Tarkenton doesn't believe that.
Not only did Francis deserve the boos, but they were long overdue,
Well,
and they weren't loud enough when they came.
Okay.
Is
we'll
this
have
the
a sequel.
easiest
Yeah.
town in the world
Maybe
to be a pro athlete in? From a coaching standpoint, isn't you see your guys? I just get the feeling that this is the most delightful place in the world for them to live and to play hockey.
You can have
and
17-inch snowfalls in January.
And they do not receive the kind of pressure they might hear from the press and the public, the way they might in Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, New York. Do you know what I'm? Does
I
that
agree.
make any sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, Joe, and I think it's absolutely right. I brought back with me from Canada a little piece where a writer in Edmonton called the Edmonton Oilers wimps and spoiled adolescents with tight collars, and
Royce's still in St. Paul.
from this day, from this day
They don't do
forward,
that until you lose your third game of the playoffs.
I'll tell you, Jim, it's one of the most brutal hatchet jobs I've ever seen done. And I brought it back just for what you're saying, to show our guys that sometimes we don't know how well off we are. Some of our guys got upset when Ted Robinson suggested that they shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame now.
Yeah.
We are very fortunate. They don't take after us, me, or the players in the manner they do in some towns.
Are you suggesting that we should cover the game with a cleaver to get
No,
your
I'm
people
not.
aroused?
No, I'm not.
Joe does that now and then.
Yeah,
you
well,
know.
yeah.
He
But
has a streak of that.
there isn't the intensity from the fans in the Twin Cities.
Sure.
I'm convinced the way there is in other areas for one reason. People here do not need the North Stars to make their lives better, for the most part. Where someone in Philadelphia might truly hinge on how the Flyers do it. It might be important to him.
You're right. And that's an interesting sociological study. You know, the most hysterical fans are in the big eastern metropolises, partly because, the sociologists will tell you the congestion in which they live. They need outlets. And when they get into a large group, they vent all of these aggressions on players, on coaches. We don't have that.
You can see farmland from your rink.
Well, Ren Blair, you remember who was the general manager and coach of the North Stars early? Ren Blair was highly indignant because he wasn't able to incite riots in the crowds. And he claimed, and he accused the crowds here, who even then were numbering 14,000, 15,000 people, of being a bunch of phlegmatic Swedes and Norwegians. And that got the Germans mad because he left them out. So he said that temperamentally our people aren't that way. So maybe, well, is it a haven for this? Is more agitation? Are you saying more agitation in the press? I don't think that's what we want. I don't think.
I don't know that I completely agree, Joe. Our fans can get very impatient. We had, at one point here, we had lost 5 home games out of 35, which meant they saw us lose once every 7 times they came to the rink. And we'd get on the power play and have 3 or 4 bad passes and not get organized, and the boos would be coming down. So I don't know that they're completely, but certainly
Now and then they throw a dead chicken.
And certainly they don't.
Spine.
They and the media do not do the hatchet jobs on our team that I see. I was amazed. I read this Edmonton. My goodness, Edmonton had a great year.
Excuse me. You're on Sportsline. Go ahead.
Hey, hello. This question is directed to Glen Sonmor.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, what will the draft consist of this year? Do you have any idea at all yet?
Yes,
He wants to know who you're going to draft.
Well, I can't tell you that, but I don't have the choice. We have a tremendously competent scouting staff that's done just a great job over the years. We will get a very, very excellent player and one who can come and play right now with us.
Well, everybody wants to know if you're going to draft this fellow Bellows.
Well, I would guess that if Boston, my own guess is Boston will take Bellows. They pick first by Colorado's choice, and then we'll have a choice of some other people. The other names that are up at the top are 2 giant defensemen, one with Portland out west and one with Billings. One's name's Kluzak, who's 6'4" and 220. He's injured right now, so they're not seeing him. Nyland is 6'4" and 210 or something. Is supposed to be very miserable, besides being effective. They are the key names there. A kid named Yaremchuk, and then the 2 Sutter twins, who are who are going to make six brothers in one family are going to be playing in the National Hockey League, and it's my fervent wish that one of them is going to be playing here, but because they are the most competitive kids I've ever seen. But
we've got a guy playing here in
choices.
Minnesota who's going to be drafted in the first round.
Yes,
How about a possibility for the North Stars? Housley.
Well, I don't think there's any question that Phil Housley is going to go very early. I think we're boxed in, Jim, where I don't think we can take them like two when we pick two. It would take a lot of nerve to do that and go by some of the people I'm talking about there. And I'm afraid by the time we get to pick again, Phil Housley is going to be long gone. And that is too bad because he's going to be a fine hockey player.
Now, before we take our next call, Joe, what do you think about, I know you're a voice of harmony and sweetness with the paper. Why can't hockey players behave like normal people on the ice? I mean, why does the National Hockey League insist on making Neanderthals out of them? I mean, what is this brawling? You had something in Chicago. I'm not blaming the North Stars for it. What happened in Chicago, and why on earth, the announcers on television kept telling us, why do they have to do this?
You got interviewed by a student today, didn't you?
Yes.
I got interviewed by the same guy who's doing a paper on violence in hockey, and the only thing I told him that might be said briefly is that I don't mind an occasional fist fight on a hockey rink, but never, Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, or rarely do these natural fist fights break out unless they have been preceded by something dangerous, a slash or a violent cross-check or whatever. Eliminate that, and I would suspect you eliminate 99% of the fighting.
The rationale for the fist fight is that it allows the players to take out their aggression. Everything is harmony after then. You know that's phony.
Joe, it's interesting. I gave the student the same kind of I said, I think that the National League is moving to eliminating fighting altogether. I really do, and I think it'll be gone in the same way it's gone from college hockey within 5 years. I think if they do first what you suggested, if they get rid of the real violent use of the stick, whether high sticking, cross-checking across the head, spearing, slashing, if they would clamp down completely on those things, I think they might find the fighting problem would disappear. That's my opinion, and I wish they would do that. They don't, for
Why
whatever
don't they
reason.
just throw the fighters out of the game?
Well, that's what college does, as I say, and not only out of that game, but the next game. And they had to do that because the players waited till the last 2 minutes and fought, because then there wouldn't be much of a penalty.
And college hockey's still popular.
Sure, and they can do that. There are a lot of owners and people, Jim, that think that people come to see that. I guess there's no other way of putting it. I think they're wrong.
Right. You're on Sportsline. Go ahead.
Good evening, Glenn. I was wondering, what are the plans of the North Stars for next year in the defensive category?
Thank you.
The defense, I think that perhaps, subject to injury healing, or whatever you want to call it, of Gary Sargent and Bill Nyrop, I think we're perhaps as deep there as we are anywhere, and that's not as much a concern of ours or mine anyway as some other positions are. For example, some big aggressive forwards. I think that's where we are the most vulnerable right now. We do have some outstanding young defensemen going to become available from college. A kid named Valdischuk, who played with Providence, that I did see play once a year ago or so, who the ratings are just excellent on. We've got a big kid named Meehan, who came up and played some games with us this year, who was an all-star in the OHA, the best junior league in Canada, who will certainly be a candidate. So I don't think we have a real problem at defense. Everybody would like to have that big, tough, mean defenseman, but
a guy like Holmgren. You're on Sportsline. Go ahead.
Yes, I was just wondering if you were going to trade with Philadelphia to get Paul Holmgren.
Paul Holmgren.
Well, I certainly hope so. I can't. I know that that's been bandied about, and that there is some talk of Philadelphia wanting to get our earlier pick, and that for the first time since I've been here, and since Paul Holmgren's been with the Flyers, I have heard some talk that he might be available. I sure hope he is, because I think, and that we are able to do something, because I think Paul Holmgren is exactly the type of player this team needs.
Where's Udo Kiesling? Does he really exist? Is there an Udo Kiesling?
There is one. He played here.
Yes, he did, and he played very well.
He didn't play
Germany,
the game,
right?
Yes, he did. You're like Charlie Hallman. You didn't get down to St. Louis and see him. He played one game for us in St. Louis, played very well. It's a complicated affair. He's got to go back to West Germany to play in the World Tournament. He's playing in the World Tournament now with West Germany. He got 2 assists against the American team, incidentally. His dad is a coach over there, and it's a very complicated thing. We're hopeful that he'll be at camp with us again next year. He made a good impression.
You get a lot of theories from phone callers in your office, and one I had a couple weeks ago was that the North Stars, or right after you lost in the playoffs, that the North Stars would have been all right if Sonmor didn't fire himself for 4 games in the middle of the season. You know, what provoked all that? A lot of people thought it was, you know, a strategic marvel because they played so well when you came back.
Well, they played so well, I was glad to see the end of me for a while. It wasn't any strategic thing, Jim. A lot of people tried to put that connotation to it, that I went up to the corner of the press box where you could see things, and you can see things better from there. But I already had J.P. Parisi seeing things from there and being able to tell me plus I had films and everything else. The plain, simple fact of the matter was I did that because I had run out of other things to do, and we were desperate. We were playing very, very poorly. I wasn't getting through to anybody. It was very apparent to me. And
what did you say? You were looking at the. You were talking to the same.
That's what Red Berenson said, and I got the same feeling. He said, Red Berenson, in describing what happened with his team, he said, I was looking at the same faces, but I had a feeling there was different people behind them. And I just...
Hartman and Soucheray have the same feeling when they talk to each other. So it isn't restricted to the hockey.
No, and what happened really, I got away from, when things were going as badly, things in anything, I suspect, go as badly as they had gone with that team for as long a period of time. And we're talking about a 20-game slump, not a game or two. We had some ties that I think camouflaged it for us, that we didn't think we were as bad as we were. When it went that bad, that long, things get very tense.
Well, let me ask.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Were you asked to step down?
No. I suggested to Louis, I'm very lucky that I have people in my bosses they show some confidence in me and work with me, and we talked about, and finally I said, I don't know what to do. We talk about it all the time. Let's try this. Let me get away from it for a while, and me from them and them from me. Give me a chance to go and talk to a couple of coaching, my close friends in coaching, Herbie Brooks and Harry Neal, and just get refreshed a little bit and come back and see if that does something. And happily it worked.
You're on Sportsline. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask. The first question I'd like to ask Glen Sonmor is, when you played in the playoffs last year, your team seemed to be more successful because you played with 3 lines. Do you feel this year that you were as successful? Did you play 3 lines during the playoffs continuously?
Most of the playoffs. We tried to play 4 for a while, and we did play 4. We were looking at playing 4 games in 5 nights, and we played 4 as long as we thought we could get away with it. You can't do that for too long, and we didn't do it the other year too for the same reason, because then you got Bobby Smith and Neil Broughton on the bench 75% of the time. So we played 3 lines mostly.
Right.
Quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
About, do you feel that possibly that in the press during the course of the season, this media wrote articles about the various players due to the fact that they didn't feel that they were playing up to their ability, is because of the fact that possibly your players or some of them cannot take constructive criticism by the press because, let's say, that their salaries are so high, that their egos are so high that they can't stand to take some criticism?
Thank you. Briefly.
I don't know. No, I don't know that salaries have anything to do with it. Some human beings can stand criticism better than others. I know that we have some players don't read the papers during the season, because I really can't answer that for you. I don't know.
Let me ask you, Joe, do you sometimes write in the style you do to jack up the athlete so that maybe he will contribute a little more, or don't you feel that kind of involvement or obligation?
I don't feel that obligation. If it happened, it would be surprising to me.
Yes.
Glenn, what sort of a relationship does Lou Nanne have with the rest of the general managers, in that it seems there's supposedly only 5 teams that he's able to trade with? Do they respect him? Do they hate him? Do they fear him, or what is it?
They respect him a great deal. I don't think there's any question about that. Louis is one of the most energetic young men I've ever met in my life, and he just works and works and works. I think that some of the deals, Louis has made some deals that have turned out so well for us that it makes it difficult for him to deal somewhat. But he's treated with great respect by the other general managers. He is very close with a number of them. And I think that some of the deals, if you look at one like Mike Fiddler to Hartford for Gordy Roberts, and the way that thing's worked out scares some teams off a little bit, and that's unfortunate. Maybe we have to make a deal that doesn't turn out so well for us.
A bad deal, right.
Yeah, maybe we do.
To keep him in the running, right?
I have almost a 3-part question for all 3 of you gentlemen. Mr. Soucheray, you being a current sports writer, Mr. Klobuchar, you being a former sports writer, early on in the season there was an article about Anders Hawkinson supposedly needing to be into a regular shift of a line. Have you, in your lifetimes as journalists, seen any type of an effect towards a coach when you suggest that that might be the case, and do you as a coach respond to that, or do you ignore that type of thing?
I've never felt that anything I've written has ever affected a coach, and don't ever hope to see that.
Have you ever tried?
Maybe
Don't
subconsciously.
you feel a burst of wisdom now and then that you think might
Occasionally.
permeate the...
I try and run Calvin's business for him, but that doesn't work.
Not even Calvin can do that. Right?
John Gilbert takes care of the hockey end of it.
Yeah.
John's got a lot of suggestions.
How about it? How about, Glenn, wisdom from the sports sheets?
Well, I read some, Herb Brooks in one of the talks I had with him suggested the smartest thing's not to read them, and maybe that's the New York influence there, but I do read them, although there was a time this year when I decided not to for a while. But I don't think I'm influenced other than, maybe I read something I never thought of, and that, so that it might present to me. I'm obviously not going to be influenced. I'm influenced by Murray Oliver and J.P. Parisi, whom I talk with constantly, and Louis Nanny, whom I talk with.
I tried to influence Van Broncklin one time. It was the first game of the Vikings ever played, and he frankly asked me. He didn't know the starting quarterback. George Shaw was the incumbent. He was a veteran, and he wasn't looking very good. Tarkenton was a rookie, and he said, I'm going to flip a coin, but I'll take your judgment. He said, who should I start at quarterback? I said, you want to start George Shaw, the veteran. The players would rally around a guy like that, so we started George Shaw. Tarkenton completed 5 touchdown passes in relief of George Shaw. It was the last time he ever asked me for advice. So, no, I agree. I don't think you should be in a position of taking advice, except on matters of faith or morals. From we're in an exalted position. Yes.
Question for Joe. What's your opinion about Holmgren coming to the North Stars?
That does not scare me. He's obviously the type of player that Glen feels is one of the missing ingredients for this team. Although I am frightened a little bit by Holmgren, and sometimes he seems uncontrollable. He has involved himself in some things that I thought required strong disciplinary action from the league, incidents with officials and whatnot. And
he got 5 games.
Yeah, and I would think you'd sure have to harness that quite a bit in order to make him useful for you.
Holmgren and Carlson on the same team, they'd have to use the National Guard for officiating.
You get Malash and Beaupre next year and go?
I would expect so. They both played quite well for us this year. Beaupre had a bit of a tough year because of an injury earlier in the year, and because, perfectly honest again, not quite as much dedication and application early as he had the year before. And I guess that's the sophomore jinx, or whatever you want to call it, into effect a little, although he came out of it very well. We're strong there.
Well, we're out of time. I want to say that we've been kind of uncouth and haven't congratulated you on having an excellent season and being a fine coach, and I know you're going to have another good year next year. Thank you, and thank you, Joe. Next week on our final edition of Sportsline this season, I'll have as my guest Minnesota Twins owner Calvin Griffith. We'll ask him to reflect on the Smalley trade and to give us his impressions of baseball under glass. Thank you tonight for watching, and we urge you to join us next week with Calvin Griffith. Good night.
Night Times is a production of KTCA, Channel 2.